go through the next 2 months, and maybe this is where my eye is some towards 2015, I think you got to use the next 2 months to compete, but to also try and answer some questions that this ball team has. And, I think getting whatever you can for Justin Masterson, and even though he's been injured and had, some poor rehab starts, I think they can get something for him. I don't think he's anyone's top choice, but everyone can't get their top choice. Or some teams are going to choose that their top choice, the price is too high. And so I do think you can get something for Justin Masterson. And I think, moving ahead, if this team is going to improve and get better in those two areas, pitching and defense, it's going to be through a rotation that consists of Kluber and Bauer and Salazar. And I would commit myself to, Danny Salazar and Trevor Bauer getting the ball every fifth day at this point for the rest of the year. And some other guys that they have, like a Zach McAllister, like a Josh Tomlin. I mean, I would try to answer the question as best as possible. Are these guys organizational depth, or are they guys that can help us win? And I think there's a big difference there. And, from the defensive standpoint, we've talked about Lindor ad nauseum, and I would be a guy who would bring him up. But I think most likely the Indians wait until September. For me, in the meantime, you play Aviles and you play Jose Ramirez at shortstop, and I think Jose Ramirez is a guy, who's another question mark. Is he a big league utility man, or is he a guy that is kind of like a Mike Aviles who could play 4 or 5 times a week, maybe at 3 or 4 different positions, and isn't just your normal utility guy? Because even if that sounds like giving up on 2014, I am not total rebuild and start over in any way, for all the reasons that you've said. This team and this organization has been dedicated to, trying to rebuild a fan base in a lot of ways. And you can't come out and tell people, hey, you're going to have to wait a couple years. But, the phrase reappropriate funds keeps coming back into my mind, because if you're going to fix starting pitching, whether it's through trades or free agency next winter, you're going to need some money to get that done.
I agree with you there. One thing, and I know, and I see Bruce is this is the point that I was going to go here. I see a comment in the chat room there, but, it's August. I get September, but to me, I bring up Lindor. If I trade Cabrera, what is 30 days? Really, what is a month? And I know some people will say, well, there's a lot, but I don't know. I don't know. That's a move that I would make. He's talking about finding things out. That's something that I want to find. I'm more interested in seeing what Lindor does at the major league level than what Ramirez has to show me during the last 2 months of the season. But I know.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I would make that move too. And
to me,
I
that's
think
a trade. Not Masterson.
Yeah.
Masterson, that's a garbage excuse to say, well, getting Masterson back is like making a trade. But to me, bringing Lindor up is like, and matter of fact, he's got way more potential than most of the guys you're going to get in a trade here at the deadline. That to me, and that's why I said, if when you and I were talking about what one move do you make to fix them, you're right. And I said, well, I think the Indians' best bet is to trade for a pitcher and bring up Lindor and see if those two combined can't give you that spark to clear that 5-game gap in the wild card.
Yeah, and I think I agree with you. And if Chris Antonetti calls me when we get off the phone and wants advice, I would tell him to bring up Lindor. And a number of people will always cite, service time and arbitration clocks. And this is my counter to that every time that I hear that about Lindor. And 2 weeks ago, I talked about Lindor for 25 minutes on your show. And I stand by every word that I said. And, the only thing I can tell you is anything that I have said about Lindor, the Indians feel the same way. And if they feel that strongly and that passionate about Lindor, then I go back to your comment just a couple minutes ago of what's 30 days. Because if you're worried about service time, and I don't mean this disrespectfully in any way to Jan Gomes, but they just gave Jan Gomes a 6-year contract extension. He's a guy that's been in their organization for a year when they handed him that deal. They have watched this kid, Lindor, grow up before their eyes. They know everything that they can know about this kid. I think worrying about 30 days of service time is likely so far down the list. To me, is foolish because, first of all, if he can help you win now, then win now. And I agree with that. And secondly, so he cures 30 more days of service time. I mean, I think that in my mind, this is a guy, you're going to be proactive instead of reactive in trying to get one of those long-term contracts to buy out those arbitration years. I mean, honestly, I don't want to go too far, but Evan Longoria got one of those deals like 7 days into his big league career. I mean,
yeah,
I don't think that the Indians would ever be that ridiculous. But if you brought him up today and he's in the lineup tonight, he plays the rest of this year. If you play all of next year, you're looking at a year and 60 days of service time, and you hand that guy a long-term deal.
I mean,
and so to me, if you're ever going to invest in someone, or if you're at least going to have the eye towards investing in someone, I think he's a great candidate because they are so familiar with him.
To me, the question, especially when we're just talking about 3, 4, 5 weeks, is are the Indians instantly better if you make that switch and call him up? And I say yes. I say he instantly, defensively, and I think offensively too, with the contribution that, or lack of, that we've gotten at the position, that he makes you no worse offensively, most likely better. Definitely he leaps you light years defensively. So I think you talk about these trades. Well, how much better does it make us? I think that bringing him up gives you as big of a shot at improvement down the stretch as one of these trades that you would make. I'm 100% with you, and I think there's a market for Cabrera too. I totally do. I think that we were talking earlier, San Francisco, Oakland, a couple of other places, definite possibilities. I think, man, if you don't make the trade, then you can justify waiting 30 days, and then you can make your changes and say we're bringing the kid up. But if you move Asdrubal, I think that's it. Everything barring his entrance to the major leagues is out of the way. I have a hard time looking at the fans and saying we're holding off on Lindor so that we can see what we got in Jose Ramirez. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The hell with that.
And I only mention that because that's what I think that the Indians would do, not necessarily what I would do.
But not only that,
and I agree with you on the Cabrera front.
How about money? You talk about service time. You talk about, how about money financially? Let's talk about the equivocation in walk-up ticket sales for the next 2, 3, 4 weeks for the debut and the first home games of this guy that they've heard so much about, that everybody has talked about and raved about being one of the, I'm not saying he's going to draw sellouts. Don't get me wrong. But, hey, that's an uptick in attendance and an uptick in belief in the month of August, when things can get hot and sticky and ugly if you fall out of contention. This bridges you to the future and perhaps brings some fans down to the building for the stretch run.
Well, you can mark me down as one of those people that would go more in the next 2 months if Lindor was brought up to this team. I completely agree with you because obviously I feel like this team is really going to continue to go nowhere and spin its wheels. And, when that happens, like you said, as you get into August and kids start to go back to school and, you start worrying about what bar Johnny's going to on his off day and what number LeBron's going to wear. We all know that the Cavs and the Browns are seconds from taking this town completely over, if they haven't already, from the Indians. So I don't think the Indians make moves for ticket sales, but it would definitely be a byproduct for sure. There would be people like me who would go down to watch him play that probably aren't going to go watch Asdrubal Cabrera's last day in Cleveland. So, and I agree with you as far as the market. I think there's a market for both of them, as crazy as it sounds, even for Justin Masterson. And
I know there is for Masty. I know there's a market for him.
I mean, if you look at some of the deals that have been made and the prices that they've paid, you know, you're not going to get top dollar for either of those guys. But I do think that you can get someone for each of those players that can potentially, again, help this team in 2015. And I think, you know, without, you know, a true white flag fire sale, I do think that you have to look toward next year and trying to fix this team or put it in its best position to win next year. And I think, you know, to me, when you look at Masterson, I mean, I heard yesterday that the Orioles are looking for either a starting pitcher or somebody that could pitch the 7th or the 8th inning. And I'm like, I've got the guy that could fill both.
They have Masty and Ubaldo over there in Baltimore.
Yeah, I mean, let's get the band back together in Baltimore, you know. But I think, you know, a team like Baltimore who has some top-end prospects and aren't willing to part with them, you know, that's a match where I can see where they're willing to maybe give their second-level guys, and they have some quality ones at the AA and AAA level that could, you know, be a piece that they could make that swap for.
I see National League. I said this a lot yesterday. I see Masterson getting the biggest haul from a National League team because I think a National League team can convince themselves that he can be not just valuable, but by switching leagues, you kind of get that, you know, that month or so that traditionally when a guy switches before everything catches up and everybody gets him in their video and all of that stuff. And I think that Masterson, I think that makes him even more attractive to a National League team. The fact that even if he's struggling in the American League, between that and what he brings as a veteran, maybe he really could. I think he's valuable. I think he's more valuable to a National League contender, I think, than the American League, just because you're switching the guys that he's going to be facing and you're kind of reshuffling the deck, and you only need him to give you a strong, you know, 6 or 8 week run. And St. Louis was a team I mentioned earlier that I've heard he's in their grouping of guys that they're going to get a pitcher. So, I mean, as we know, their farm system is pretty robust. There's a lot of potential there, but I think with you, some people have been sarcastic, we'll get a bag of balls for both of them, and I'm like, I think you undervalue. Look at what teams are paying. I mean, you get some middle grade prospects for a Jake Peavy who's 1-9, you know? Like, I mean,
yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Jerry, and that's one of the trades that I point to. You know, the Giants are past all-in mode. Okay, you know, their chips are in the middle, and so
I could see Asdrubal going there.
Yep, I could see where they both go, Jerry, and that's where I was going to say. You know, that's a deal that really, you know, fits for the Indians, where maybe they can maximize their assets because the Giants are a team that don't have, you know, the deepest system. So if they want to try and get, you know, a little bit of a better quality player, maybe it's Cabrera and Masterson that go together, and you get one quality player and maybe one guy who's a little bit behind. And, you know, the other thing in talking about trying to make a trade at the deadline, and I mean, if we're in some way discussing, you know, some kind of selling, looking at what the Indians have done in the past, you know, one thing when the Indians have been in selling mode or at least trading a veteran mode, one thing that they have always done in an effort to try and get the best player in return is, you know, call the team, you know, on a budget or cheap or whatever word you want, but they've committed this money to Asdrubal Cabrera and Justin Masterson, and in years past, they will pick up the rest of their salary for this year if that means getting a better player. And
yes.
I would say just on precedent alone that they have done that so many times. If they move those guys in the next 24 hours, I would expect that because they would get a much better player because of it.
And that's the other thing that people forget when they do these, the trade machines and all these things, is the more money, like you just said, the more of that remaining salary, which for Asdrubal, I think it's almost $3.5 million that he's owed. And I would assume, let's see, what would Masterson be? He's pretty close.
Well, they
He's
should be about the same. I mean, Masterson, I think, was on a 9.75 deal, and Cabrera makes 10. So,
so
I mean,
together,
you're looking at...
That's $7 million right there between the two. The more of that the Indians pay,